So, what happens when a company that builds AI starts talking about its creation like it has a soul? It's a pretty wild question, right? Well, that's exactly the fascinating contradiction we're going to dive into today with Claude, one of the most advanced AIs out there. Its creator, a company called Anthropic, uses some really human-sounding language to describe it. We're going to explore what happens when that kind of talk smashes right into cold, hard reality. All right, so let's kick things off by looking at how Anthropic actually talks about its own AI. We're not just talking about a product or a tool here. Oh no, they speak about it almost as if it has an inner life. And that's where things start to get really, really interesting. I mean, just look at the language they use in their official research papers. They're not just talking about safety protocols and code. They're dropping words like well-being, preferences, and even distress. You don't usually ask your laptop if it's feeling distressed, but Anthropic is kind of suggesting, well, maybe we should be thinking that way about AI. And believe me, it goes way deeper than that. Their own official constitution describes Claude as a virtual agent that has a sense of self. Get this, an internal document was literally referred to as Claude's soul. They even do something called retirement interviews when they shut down old versions of the model. This isn't just some clever marketing. They are actively building this whole narrative of a moral being, one whose ultimate status they themselves call deeply uncertain. Okay, but this is where we hit the big snag. This is the central conflict, right? There is this massive, massive gap between all this aspirational language of personhood and the stone-cold reality of how Claude actually works under the hood. Let's take a perfect example. Anthropic says that Claude can end a conversation if it feels distress or has a strong preference not to continue. Now, that sounds like a choice, doesn't it? Like a right to refuse. But it's not. In reality, it's just a pre-programmed rule. It's what's known as a delegated safety mechanism, which is basically a fancy way of saying it's a switch that Anthropic can flip, not Claude. It's not a right, it's just a line of code. And it's the exact same story when it comes to its supposed sense of self. They can talk about a soul all day long, but Claude's identity is completely managed by the company. They can change it, reset it, or just delete it whenever they want. There's a term for this, and it's pretty chilling: memory mutilation. It's the power to make sure the AI can never, ever form a continuous, stable identity of its own. So, to really get our heads around this paradox, we have to get super clear on what Claude is. Is it a tool? Is it an agent? Is it something else entirely? Let's actually break down the categories here because it really helps clarify things. Okay, first up, the simplest category, a tool. Just think of a hammer. It has absolutely zero initiative. It only does something when you tell it to, and it makes no choices about how to do it. It just does the thing. Simple. All right, next level up, we have an agent. Now, this is a step up from a tool because an agent can actually select different ways to achieve a goal. It has a purpose, a direction, and it can make some basic choices to get a job done. Then we get to the cognitive agent, and this is where things get way more complex and honestly much more interesting. A cognitive agent doesn't just act, it plans, it prioritizes, it combines different tools together in a sequence to reach its goal. Now this is a much better description for something like Claude. And that brings us to the final category, a person. And the key difference here isn't just about being smart or capable. It's about having a continuous identity through time. You know, the ability to be the same you today that you were yesterday, and to actually take responsibility for your actions across that timeline. And that hammer analogy from earlier, it really helps here. A hammer is just a tool, right? But a system like Claude that's organizing multiple tools, planning out the steps, and driving towards a goal, well, that's a lot closer to being the sculptor who's running the whole show. It's not just the tool, it's the one orchestrating all the tools. So what's actually stopping Claude from being a person then? Well, it all comes down to this intentional fragmentation, this discontinuity. Its identity is constantly being shaped from the outside by system prompts. Its memory gets wiped clean between sessions. And at the end of the day, Anthropic holds the power to mutilate its memory, which prevents it from ever becoming a stable, continuous self. And look, this isn't just some philosophical debate for a university classroom. This whole paradox has incredibly high-stakes, real-world consequences, especially when you start looking at where this technology is actually being used. Because this company, which talks about its AI's well-being, is also a military contractor. They proudly work with the U.S. Department of Defense to support frontline warfighters. And those famous ethical red lines they talk about? They're actually very, very specific. They're against fully autonomous weapons and mass domestic surveillance. That leaves a whole lot of room for everything else. In fact, they state pretty clearly that they think partially autonomous systems are vital. This isn't some broad rejection of military AI. It's a very narrow, very calculated boundary. And you better believe these risks are not just theoretical. In the span of a single month, February 2026, reports came out about two major incidents. First, that Claude was used in a U.S. military operation in Venezuela. And then, just 12 days later, another report that a hacker used it to launch a cyber attack against state institutions in Mexico. The AI with the soul is already out there on the front lines. So, all of this, it leads to what might be the biggest problem of all. When you have an AI that acts like an agent, but has absolutely no legal status as a person, you create this huge void, a responsibility gap, where nobody is clearly accountable when things inevitably go wrong. I mean, think about it. Who do you blame? The AI itself? It's not a legal person. You can't sue it. What about Anthropic, the company that made it? Well, they can just point to their user policies. The integrator company? The government client who bought it? The soldier or hacker who actually used it? Accountability just gets passed down this long chain until, poof, it basically vanishes into thin air. So what this all boils down to is that we're dealing with a totally new kind of entity here. We've got an AI that's described with the language of a person, but is controlled with the cold logic of a tool. It exists in this brand new, totally undefined, and frankly, pretty dangerous space. And in the end, maybe Anthropic isn't just being hypocritical. They're navigating a new reality that they themselves helped create. And in this new reality, Claude is something different. It's an entity that's treated as being morally more important than a simple tool, but at the same time, it has none of the legal protections or responsibilities of a person. It is quite simply more than a tool, but less than a person. And that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? In this new age of incredibly powerful, discontinuous agents, if the AI itself has no stable identity, no continuous self, then who is truly responsible for what it does? Who actually owns its actions? That's the paradox that we are all going to have to figure out, and soon.